Welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive. We're just incredibly thrilled to have you joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here.
Whether you are prepping for a major policy meeting or trying to decode the inner workings of the federal government, or you just want to understand the actual mechanics behind the headlines coming out of Washington.
You are exactly in the right place.
You really are. So today, our source material is an excerpt from the Wikipedia page on the United States Senate Committee on the Budget.
Which I know sounds a bit dry at first glance, but I promise you it is not.
Oh, it's fascinating. And our mission statement for you on this deep dive is to decode the mechanics of the federal government's purse strings. By the end of this conversation, you are going to understand exactly who draws the trillion-dollar blueprints in Washington, D.C. We'll get into how the jurisdictional boundaries work and some of the wildest historical anomalies that have completely upended the process over the years.
Right. And to set the stage for this, I want you to picture something in your mind's eye. Imagine a massive, incredibly detailed set of architectural blueprints for the United States Capitol building.
Okay, I see it.
Picture those glowing blue lines, right? The precise structural measurements, the foundational framework that dictates where every single wall and load-bearing pillar has to go.
Yeah, the underlying skeleton of the whole thing.
Exactly. Keep that mental image of a rigid, overarching blueprint in your mind because it is absolutely central to understanding the true power of the Senate Budget Committee.
Okay, let's unpack this because the most crucial distinction we need to make right off the bat, and the source material makes a major point of this, is the jurisdictional boundary between the Budget Committee and the other heavy-hitting financial committees in the Senate.
It is so easy to mix them up.
It really is. If you follow Washington, it is incredibly easy to hear the word budget and immediately assume we are talking about the people sitting in a room writing the actual checks to fund the military or national parks.
Right. People think budget means spending money directly.
Exactly. But the text explicitly defines a very different division of labor.
It is a vital distinction. The Budget Committee does not fund specific programs. Instead, we can think of them as the architect from our blueprint analogy.
The architect, I like that.
Yeah, the source tells us their primary function is to prepare the budget resolution. That resolution sets out a broad blueprint for Congress regarding the total levels of revenues and spending for the government as a whole.
So they are looking at the macro level.
100%. They are drawing the outer boundary lines of the House, deciding how massive the economic structure of the federal government is going to be for that fiscal year. But they are not the ones going out and buying the lumber for the guest room.
Right. And that brings us to the builder. If the Budget Committee is the architect drafting the blueprint, the Appropriations Committee is the builder. Our source notes that the Appropriations Committee has legislative jurisdiction over the actual appropriations bills.
Which are the granular line item bills.
Exactly. Those are the bills that provide the specific funding for government programs. So the architects on the Budget Committee draw the map and set the absolute limits, but the builders on the Appropriations Committee are the ones swinging the hammers, making the specific policy spending decisions, and cutting the literal checks to keep the lights on within those broader limits.
And we have to complete the triangle with the third major player mentioned in the text, which is the Finance Committee.
Ah, yes.
In our construction analogy, they act as the bank and the tax collector. The source points out that the Finance Committee, which operates similarly to the Ways and Means Committee over in the House of Representatives, has legislative jurisdiction over the revenue side of the equation.
So they bring the money in.
Right. They handle taxes, but they also have jurisdiction over massive entitlement programs like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid.
So you have the architect setting the total limits, the builder deciding exactly which discretionary rooms get funded, and the bank collecting the revenue to finance the whole operation while managing the guaranteed entitlements.
That is the structure in a nutshell.
That structural separation is clear, but since you are already familiar with how Washington generally works, let's talk about where this actually gets contentious. Because it is not just a polite division of labor.
Not at all.
The Budget Committee sets the overarching totals, but how does that actually constrain the Appropriations Committee in practice?
What's fascinating here is how these very specific boundaries of jurisdiction force a highly structured and honestly often high-friction, multi-step process for government funding.
It creates a bottleneck by design.
Exactly. The Budget Committee's resolution sets what are essentially spending caps. They establish the maximum amount of money that the federal government is allowed to spend.
So it's a hard ceiling.
Right. Once that budget resolution is adopted, it forces the Appropriations Committee to make their specific funding decisions within a predetermined box.
The builders cannot suddenly decide to build a 10-story house if the architects only improved a foundation for a 3-story house.
That's the perfect way to look at it. It creates a system of internal checks and balances right there within the legislative branch, intentionally designing a system where committees have to negotiate and sometimes clash over these fiscal boundaries.
It is a brilliant way to visualize the friction. It is not just about writing policy, it is about who holds the leash on the total spending.
Precisely.
To really grasp how they wield that power, let's look at the physical and historical reality of the committee. According to our source, the Senate Budget Committee is a relatively modern invention in the grand scheme of the Senate.
Yeah, it hasn't been around forever.
No, it was established as a standing committee in 1974 by the Congressional Budget and Impoundment Control Act.
And when they hold their hearings and markups, they gather in room 608 of the Dirksen Senate Office Building.
Right. And beyond just drafting the resolution, the text highlights another massive source of their influence, which is their oversight jurisdiction over the Congressional Budget Office, or the CBO.
The CBO is effectively the referee in Washington.
You really are.
They are the nonpartisan statistical agency that scores the economic impact and cost of legislation. Having jurisdiction over the CBO means the Budget Committee is intimately tied to the very math that dictates whether a bill is considered fiscally viable or a budget buster.
Because that data is the lifeblood of the budget resolution.
You cannot draw an accurate blueprint if you do not have a reliable surveyor telling you the cost of materials, and the CBO serves that surveyor role for the entire Congress.
So who actually wields this architectural power right now? Let's bring this right up to the present day and look at the 119th Congress.
Let's do it.
The source gives us the exact makeup of the committee for the current session. There are 21 seats in total. It is currently split with 11 seats for the majority, which are the Republicans, and 10 seats for the minority, which is made up of Democrats and 1 independent. The current chair holding the gavel is Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, and the ranking member leading the minority side is Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon.
And I just want to step in right here, just to be perfectly clear for you, the listener, as we discuss this current roster and the leadership of Graham and Merkley. We are looking at this purely through the lens of Senate mechanics and procedural structure.
Absolutely.
We are impartially reporting the factual makeup provided in the source material to explain how the committee functions. We're not endorsing any political viewpoints, nor are we taking any sides regarding the specific parties or the individuals holding these seats. The goal here is entirely about understanding the structural dynamics of the 119th Congress.
Exactly, well said. We are just looking at the math and the machinery. And speaking of the math of that roster, there is a fascinating procedural quirk hidden in the minority breakdown that the source highlights.
Oh, this is a good one.
Yeah, I mentioned the minority has 10 seats consisting of Democrats and 1 independent. That independent is Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont. The text includes a specific footnote explaining that while Senator Sanders is formally recognized as an independent, he is listed under the minority roster for the purposes of committee assignments because he officially caucuses with the Democrats.
It is one of those highly nuanced procedural realities of the Senate. The institution operates on a strict two-party organizing principle for the sake of allocating committee seats, budgets, and staff.
Right, you have to pick a lane procedurally.
You do. Even if a senator maintains an independent political identity, they have to align with one of the 2 major voting blocs to participate in the actual organizational structure of the chamber. It is a perfect example of how the rigid rules of the Senate interact with the individual political realities of its members.
It really highlights how delicate the mathematical balance of the Senate is. Every single seat, every single caucus decision determines who controls the blueprint for the entire federal government.
It's a house of cards sometimes.
And frankly, that mathematical fragility brings us to the most incredible part of our source material. Here's where it gets really interesting.
I was hoping we'd get to this.
If you dig into the historical membership rosters and the footnotes regarding committee leadership, there is a wild chronology from the year 2001 during the 107th Congress.
It reads less like dry procedural history and more like a political thriller.
It really does. It's a story of political musical chairs. Let's walk through this timeline.
It is easily one of the most chaotic periods in modern Senate history, and it perfectly illustrates the vulnerability of these massive institutions to incredibly slim margins.
So let's set the scene. The date is January 3, 2001. The new Congress has just been sworn in following the 2000 election.
The Senate is evenly divided.
Right, a flawless 50-50 split between Republicans and Democrats. Now, the Constitution dictates that in a 50-50 Senate, the Vice President of the United States serves as the tie-breaking vote.
But on January 3rd, the new president has not been inaugurated yet.
Exactly. The outgoing Democratic Vice President, Al Gore, is still physically in office until Inauguration Day on January 20th. Because he is sitting in the chair and available to break ties for the Democrats technically control the Senate.
Which means they control the committee gavels, including the Budget Committee. But everyone involved knows this power comes with a strict 17-day expiration date.
The Senate literally has to pass a unique organizing resolution, SRES 7, just to manage this bizarre lame duck dynamic. This resolution officially hands control of the Budget Committee to the Democrats for exactly 17 days.
It's just 17 days.
During this incredibly brief window, Democrat Kent Conrad of North Dakota becomes the chair of the Budget Committee. He's handed the gavel. He is technically the architect of the federal budget, but there is a ticking clock echoing in the background.
Think about the logistical nightmare of that from a functional perspective. You are handed control of the committee that dictates the fiscal policy of the United States, but you only have 2.5 weeks before the constitutional math forces you to hand it back.
You can't get anything done.
Nothing. You cannot hire permanent staff, you cannot launch long-term CBO inquiries, and you certainly cannot draft a comprehensive budget resolution. It is a chairmanship in name, only a placeholder, dictated entirely by the calendar.
And then the calendar flips. We hit January 20, 2001. The new Republican administration is officially sworn in. The new vice president takes the oath of office, and in an instant, the tie-breaking vote in the Senate shifts from the Democrats to the GOP.
And under the exact terms of that organizing resolution they passed on January 3rd. Control of the chamber flips, effective at noon.
Noon. Just like that, Kent Conrad has to surrender the gavel, and Republican Pete Domenici of New Mexico abruptly takes over as the new chair of the Budget Committee.
So we are not even out of January, and the committee has already seen 2 different chairmen from 2 different parties.
The entire philosophical approach to the federal budget shifts over a lunch hour based entirely on the inauguration of the executive branch.
But the drama does not stop in January.
No, it doesn't. We jump ahead a few months to June 6, 2001. The Senate is still sitting at that razor-thin 50-50 margin with Republicans holding the tiebreaker. Then, Senator James Jeffords of Vermont makes an announcement that sends shockwaves through Washington. He declares that he is leaving the Republican Party. He changes his affiliation to independent, and crucially, he announces that he will caucus with the Democrats.
A single human being changes his mind, and the entire architecture of the federal government fundamentally alters.
That is exactly what happens. In an evenly divided Senate, Jeffords' party switch immediately shifts the hard math. The Democrats now have a 51-49 numerical advantage.
The vice president's tie-breaking vote is rendered completely irrelevant.
The Democrats instantly take control of the Senate again. The gavel is taken out of Pete Domenici's hands, and the power flips for the 3rd time in a single calendar year. Kent Conrad is reinstated as the chairman of the Budget Committee.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, I want you to picture something else in your mind right now.
Go for it.
Imagine a giant, chaotic wall calendar from the year 2001. Picture thick red marker circles drawn around January 3rd, January 20th, and June 6th. Imagine frantic arrows drawn between the names Conrad and Domenici, crossing out one to write the other over and over again. What you are visualizing is the sheer fragility of legislative power.
It is staggering when you really think about the scale of what they control.
Exactly. We're talking about the Budget Committee. These are the architects of the federal government's entire financial framework. We're talking about trillions of dollars, the funding mechanisms for the military, the economic direction of the nation, the stability of the global financial markets.
Huge stakes.
All of it is theoretically governed by the steady hand of this committee. And yet, because of the rigid, uncompromising math of Senate procedure and a 50-50 split, a single individual's decision to switch caucuses completely upended the leadership of the entire U.S. budget process. They had 3 distinct shifts in power, 3 total changes of the chairmanship in just 6 months.
How does a committee even function under those conditions?
Barely. Every time the gavel flips, the committee staff changes. The majority staff director, who actually writes the technical language of the budget resolution, is replaced. The priorities sent to the Congressional Budget Office for scoring are completely reversed.
The whiplash must have been intense.
It shows you that while the rules of the Senate are incredibly strict, they are also deeply, almost alarmingly vulnerable to the smallest possible numerical shift. The grand blueprint of the United States government was essentially held hostage by a game of musical chairs.
It is easily the most compelling narrative hidden in these procedural footnotes. 3 chairmen in 6 months for the committee that literally maps out the finances for the entire country. The 17-day reign of Kent Conrad, the noon flip on Inauguration Day, and the June 6th earthquake. It is a brilliant reminder that behind all the dry procedural language of Washington, there are incredibly high stakes and dramatic human variables. So what does this all mean? We have talked about the architects versus the builders, the strategic friction of spending caps, the logistical setup of the 119th Congress, and the absolute chaos of the 2001 calendar.
Right.
Why should you, listening to this deep dive right now, care about the internal plumbing of the Senate Budget Committee?
It is the essential question. Why does this structural knowledge matter to someone who is not sitting in room 608 of the Jerkson building?
You should care, because this knowledge changes how you consume information. The next time you are reading an article about a looming government shutdown, or you are prepping for a policy meeting regarding federal grants, or you are just watching the evening news, you are going to hear terms thrown around like budget resolution and appropriations bill.
And most people conflate those terms.
They do. They think they're interchangeable. But you won't. You will be the smartest person in the room.
Because you now know exactly who draws the map.
That is the Budget Committee, the architects setting the hard ceilings. And you know who writes the actual checks? That is the Appropriations Committee, the builders trying to fund specific agencies within those strict caps.
You understand that when the Budget Committee passes a resolution, it is a broad framework, a mathematical constraint, not a finalized spending check.
You understand the friction built into the system, and you understand how a single shifted seat in the Senate can completely rewrite the fiscal blueprint of the country. You have successfully decoded a massive piece of the language of Washington.
You really have. You possess a structural understanding of the legislative machinery that most casual observers completely overlook. It allows you to see the true leverage points in federal policy. But before we wrap up our analysis of this source material, I want to leave you with one final lingering thought.
Oh, I love these.
While we were exploring the origins of this committee, there was a very brief historical anomaly mentioned right at the beginning of our text that we have not resolved. The source notes that the Budget Committee briefly operated as a special committee from 1919 to 1920 during the 66th Congress. But then, as we discussed, it was not established as a standing permanent committee until 1974.
That is a 54-year gap.
This raises an important question. What happened during that 54-year gap? For over half a century, through the Roaring '20s, the entirety of the Great Depression, the mobilization for World War II, the dawn of the Cold War, and the space race, how did the United States Congress handle a massive blueprint of federal spending without a dedicated permanent budget committee?
It's a massive blind spot.
Who was acting as the architect during some of the most expansive, and turbulent decades in American history? And perhaps even more intriguing to consider what finally broke in the system in 1974 that made Congress realize they absolutely needed to create a permanent standing committee to control the purse strings.
They went 54 years without it and suddenly couldn't.
It is a fascinating historical mystery regarding the evolution of American power, something for you to mull over and perhaps explore on your own.
That is such a fantastic question to leave on, the mystery of the invisible architect of the mid-20th century. We want to warmly thank you for joining us on this deep dive today. We hope you walk away feeling incredibly well-informed, equipped with a new understanding of the architectural blueprints of Washington, and ready to decode the next big financial headline.
Keep asking questions and keep exploring the mechanics behind the news.
We will catch you on the next deep dive.